Welcome to Highly Sensitive, Happily Married, the podcast that teaches you to not only have an easier marriage as a sensitive woman, but to have one that feels more amazing by the day. Where you'll hear relatable stories, love advice that works, and coaching on how to have a marriage where feeling upset and disconnected is a thing of the past, and where instead a sense of loving connection and even fun and lightness is the norm. I'm Hannah Brooks, highly sensitive person, love expert, and marriage coach, and I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. Hello, my friends. How are you? How are you doing? I hope the answer is really well, despite some of the world events that are challenging so many of us. I hope you're doing as well as can be. I hope this episode can amp up that wellness even more. I myself am doing quite well. My husband is off bike packing right now for a 4-day adventure by himself. I'm here with my 3 boys, alone with those guys. And you know, what struck me about this is in the past, I used to really dread the times that it was just me alone with all the boys, my sons. But I'm not dreading. I haven't dreaded it at all. I'm really enjoying having my boys around. And I've been loving mixing things up this summer, like having slightly new experiences, after sort of a monotonous year during the first year of the pandemic. And ultimately, I'm really glad to be supporting my husband in his adventuring because, it's so important for us to do the things we enjoy for ourselves, to engage in the things that we enjoy in our lives. It's so important for our marriages, right? Such a benefit to our marriage. And that's really kind of the topic I want to dive into today. So I want to start off by telling you a little, bringing you back to the past. When I was about 18, I spent some months in Costa Rica, where someone gave me, a friend, or I think gave me the book, The Celestine Prophecy. Some of you might remember this. This was one of the very first books I read, one of the earliest books that I read in sort of the self-help realm, sort of spiritual realm. And this, I don't know, my memory of this book is that it's kind of written in a sort of cheesy way, but it was really fun for me back then. And it opened my mind to some things. Most notably for today is it was the first place that I ever came across this idea that how we as people, as human beings, and certainly I see this with clients, that we go searching for someone else to complete us, right? As if, and I think this is what the book talked about, the image that I'm remembering is as if we ourselves are only half a circle and we need to go find that other half of a circle in our partner, right? We need to go find a partner who will then complete us, who will make us a whole circle, right? Who will make us whole and make us feel complete. But of course, this is really not a great approach to romantic relationships. And it has so many negative consequences when we are looking out there for our other half, looking out there for someone to complete us, looking towards our husband to complete us. We are really, in fact, a complete whole, a complete circle already. Yeah. Or really, another way of putting this is our work is to feel that wholeness, is to sense ourselves as whole. Right? So instead of looking to our partner to complete us, we need to complete ourselves. Instead of you looking towards your man to complete you, complete yourself. And I know many of you probably are yeah, I get that. I don't look to him to complete me. But I so many people think that, and then they're doing it nonetheless at a subtle level. So just be open to the possibility that there might be something in here for you about learning how to step more into your own wholeness and learning how to complete yourself even more. I find in my work with clients that so many of them come to me unhappy on some level, and that they are looking to their partner to fix it. right? And it's often really that they have this very unconscious idea that they live out, that it's really like his job to make them happy. Right? And I know that this was sort of a way I used to think too. And this happens for so many of us women. And again, I'm including myself here, my younger self here. When in a relationship, like especially as soon as we've decided to commit to our partner's decided to commit to us, or we've decided to get married, or we go ahead and we get married, it's almost like a switch gets flipped, and we start to make our partners responsible for our happiness. So my mom always used to, before I first got married, I remember her specifically saying, like warning me, she was like, hey, be aware when you get married, the archetype of marriage will move in with you. And I think a piece of what she meant there, or a piece of that, like this archetype, at least as we modern women have kind of grown up thinking about or relating to marriage, is this. It's like, once we're married, then our partner's gonna help complete us. Then our partner's gonna make us happy, right? I think that's like when my mom was kind of warning me about that. Be aware of that. That was kind of what she was saying. And what I see is like as young single women, we are pretty devoted to our own happiness, right? We do what pleases us. We pursue our passions. We go out and have fun and have great friendships and hobbies, etc. I mean, maybe not all of us, but I bet you can relate to what I'm saying. But then we meet our man and we commit to him. And to a lesser or greater degree, many of us really do stop being devoted to our own happiness and hand that job over to our partner. Can you relate to this? We let go of the responsibility for our own enjoyment of life, and we make our man responsible for it. Now, I know that this might sound like an exaggeration, and it is to a degree, of course, but it really does show up in subtle and not so subtle ways all the time in my work with clients. I hear from my truly amazing, wonderful clients, people like you, things like, he needs to say thank you more. And what they're kind of adding, but they're not actually saying to the end of that sentence is, so I can be happy. He should play with the kids more, so I can be happy. He needs to plan dates more, so I can be happy, right? Or they just expect their man to be the center and like the prime source of like deep intellectual conversations, deep emotional understanding, social adventuring, keeping the house clean, right? All these things that we kind of put onto our partner to kind of provide for us, yeah? So that we can be happy, yeah? I talk a lot. You've probably heard me if you're on my email list or just been listening to this podcast for a while. I talk a lot about how this doesn't work so well in relationships. Right? I'm going to just reiterate that briefly here. It has this tendency when we're putting all this need on him, putting these, like whether we're telling him he has to do these things or energetically demanding these things from him, it has this tendency to infuse the relationship with a sense of duty and pressure. Right? It leads him, our partner, often to feeling controlled and not allowed to be who he is. And like the relationship is a job, is work, right? Instead of a joyous, loving experience. And it, obviously it generally leads to kind of anything but actual, true happiness. And please, side note, know that when I'm speaking about when I use the word happiness, I mean like fulfillment, joy, just good stuff, not necessarily like superficial happy, joy, right? But like fulfillment, satisfaction, contentment, love, connection, joy. Okay. And so here's the next like super important thing here. The reality is that no one else has the power to be a constant source of making you happy or patching up your unhappiness. It's truly only something that can be created from inside of yourself. I think it's really interesting to also note that in the history of marriage, if you pick up a book, there's actually a really fun book. It's Elizabeth Gilbert, actually, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love and Big Magic. She wrote a book called something about, I don't know the title, something about marriage. And she goes through this history of marriage in there. And it was a fun read, so I suggest it. But marriage, for most of history, was more of an economic and survival and sort of resources benefiting arrangement, right? It was not to fix anyone's personal well-being or emotional well-being, right? It was not to provide the partners with unwavering admiration or joy, right? Or just emotional contentment, right? It was for something else. So if those people in the past were happy, it was because they were or knew how to be the source of their own happiness, the source of their own wholeness, right? All throughout time up until now. It's only recently that we've looked to marriage and to our partners to be the source of our happiness, right? And it's not working so well. We also know that many single people are very happy, right? Single isn't worse than together. So our partner isn't the reason we're happy or unhappy. So please understand that I am not saying relationships are not part of your happiness, right? I, of all people, know how deeply a healthy, happy marriage supports a depth of joy to life that is, in my opinion, it's unparalleled, right? So relationships, 100%, they contribute to our happiness. Because when we have a marriage, a romantic relationship, we have someone to love, right? You have someone to look at or think of and feel love in your heart for, right? You have someone to laugh with, someone to be by your side as you navigate the wildness of life, right? But your relationship is not there to complete you. It is not there to provide your basic happiness. It contributes to it. So if you want a light, loving, connected, fulfilling marriage, devote yourself to your own happiness and enjoyment of life. Devote yourself to your own fulfillment. And if you're often or, just occasionally grumpy or critical or annoyed or feeling like you need a lot that you aren't getting from your husband, take that as a signal that it's time to take care of you, to fill yourself up, to look at what in the moment will make you feel more whole, right? Don't take it as a signal that he's a jerk or it's time to get a divorce. Take it as a signal to devote yourself in this moment, or a little bit more today, or a little bit more in the next week or month or 6 months to your own happiness. And I'm going to get into a little bit of what that means, how to do that in a few minutes here. But first I want to tell you some of the specific benefits of devoting yourself to your own happiness and a story about a client. There are many benefits to being the source of your own fulfillment, to having the capacity to bring that to yourself. And I'm just going to list a few of them. For one, you'll have more reserves, internal reserves, to deal with upsets. And you'll bounce back easier. You'll have better capacity to overlook your partner's faults. And, because the whole world ultimately, including your hubby, will look and feel better to you, right? That's we all know that. When we're feeling well inside ourselves, everything out there looks better and is easier to deal with, right? And because of this, also, you're just not going to need so much from him, which is a beautiful thing because he'll be more likely to kind of feel lighter around you and then naturally like want to be around you and give you attention and love on you. Yeah. And, you'll both recognize yourself, you, as way more the woman that he originally fell in love with, right? So you'll feel back home in yourself. You'll just get to be happy kind of alongside each other instead of feeling like love is some sort of duty, right? Or job that you have to provide for each other. And tending to yourself, providing this fulfillment for yourself, it's really just fundamental self-respect, right? You live in a human body. You live in a body, mind, heart system. And it needs joy. It needs pleasure. It needs to be well regarded. It needs to be well taken care of, right? It needs to be respected. Right? So that self-respect it's always a path to teaching others how to respect you. When you respect this being that you are, when you live out that respect, it gets reflected back from the world around you, from other people. They respect you. So quick story about a client that comes to mind here. So at the beginning of our coaching together, she was pretty unhappy with her husband. She really felt like he wasn't meeting her needs. And so we looked at what things were like, meaning like how she was showing up for herself differently now or then, than in the early days of their relationship. So like when she and her husband were first together, what was the difference between how she was, showing up in her life and for herself versus back then? So she took stock of that, and she was really shocked to see the difference. Back then, in those early days, she did all sorts of things for herself. Right? She played on a sports team. She spent time with friends. She had an apartment she decorated in a fun way, that she really loved and enjoyed being in that space. She went to movies when she wanted to on her own, just because she felt like it. Right? She did all sorts of things that she enjoyed. But in her current life with her husband, she wasn't making time for herself. She was never making time for herself. And she was instead filling her days like always working and like for long hours, extra long hours. Or she was checking things off the to-do list of having a home and raising a child. So the bigger truth, rather than her husband not meeting her needs, the bigger truth was that she had let her own self slip away from herself. She wasn't meeting her own needs. She wasn't making herself happy. But her tendency, it's like totally normal for the human brain. So what our brains want to do is blame the other person for it, right? Make our partner responsible for it. Especially when we've grown up in this world where we're kind of taught the other person completes you, right? He makes you happy. And so of course, when we get married, we're looking towards that person to do that for us. And we so often slip away from ourselves and forget to do it for ourselves. And that's where so much of the sense of this isn't good enough. There's something missing. I need more comes from. So once this client of mine saw this, right, that she had let herself slip away from herself and she wasn't meeting her own needs, it was such a great motivation for her to begin to add more pleasure and fun to her life, regardless of what her husband was doing. And so, of course, she and I got to work together on the thinking, the mindset, the beliefs that were blocking her happiness in general and that were preventing her from doing some of that stuff too. And yes, the result of this was that seemingly magically, her marriage started to feel better and better. And she felt more nourished and just overall way happier in her marriage. This is not a once and done thing, right? This is something like tending to our own happiness, devoting ourselves to our own happiness is something we get to do for ourselves for the rest of our lives. And sometimes we're going to forget. Honestly, for me, this is the area that I've been doing some work on myself lately in my marriage too. Like, consider it, I'm supporting my marriage, but it's really me working on myself here, because I think during the pandemic, I sort of fell off a little ways off the wagon, of like devoting myself to my happiness, right? And I bet a lot of you can relate. Like, the kids were at home way more. It was just like life started to be like, it was a little cramped, right? There wasn't a lot of room. There weren't a lot of places to go, a lot of options to get out. Things started, like, I started to take things kind of more seriously. So anyway, this has been my work this summer, is sort of pulling my focus back to enjoying myself more, playing more, filling myself up. And it's 100% rippled out into revivifying lightness and sweetness and just joy and connection with my husband. So get to work to make yourself feel whole, fulfilled. Like, be happy first, and your marriage will follow. That's like one of my biggest messages, right? That I've been saying in so many different ways over the course of this podcast. And I just said it really succinctly. And there's a lot to that, right? It's not as simple as, just go be happy, right? But it's a very simple, basic guideline of how to make your marriage happy. Go be happy first, and your marriage will follow. All right. So I'm going to sort of go into something that I don't talk that much about in this particular language, but I want to dabble in this way of languaging things right now, which is this idea of feminine energy. Because I think it will, like, by talking about it in this way, it will maybe reach you in a slightly new way. I've talked about it in different ways before, but let's talk about it in as many ways as we can so that it becomes super clear to you how this works, okay? So feminine energy, the feminine, and we all have the masculine and feminine in us energy, right? But the feminine is like receptive, full, like magnetic way of being. And a good metaphor is like the egg, the female egg that draws the sperm to it. Yeah? The egg doesn't have to work hard to get the sperm to come to her. Yeah? She just exists in her beautiful fullness, and thousands of little sperm rush towards her. Right? Very attractive, that egg. Another metaphor for this is think of a flower in full bloom, right? This flower just emanates this smell and these colors, and the bees just rush to her. Yeah? They're so attracted to her. She's like, this flower is so magnetic to those bees. So in the same way, you being full, filled up with more enjoyment, like more of a sense of goodness in you, more joy, more well-being, more ease, more sense of sufficiency, like that is very magnetic to your man, to the people around you. Like the egg, like the flower. Yeah? Being full like the flower, being full of all that like the egg, it's magnetizing. So a little side note here, I just want to make sure I insert this somewhere, which is that you don't have to be, this is like when I'm talking about this, it doesn't mean you have to feel fulfilled in all areas of your life or happy in all areas of your life. Not at all. I'm just saying add a bit more fulfillment, a bit more joy to yourself, right? And your marriage happiness is likely to go up in direct proportion. Yeah? So trying to get filled up from others out there, our partner, is totally normal, but it doesn't work so well, right? It's the opposite of what really is effective, right? Being full, allowing ourselves to be in the knowing of the gift and the joy and the gold that we are, right? Knowing ourselves as worthy of pleasure and taking action from that place, giving ourselves the gift of like doing the things that bring us pleasure, right? That's what amps up our well-being, or our fulfillment and like the attention that we get in our marriage, the connection that we feel in our marriage. So magnetizing, when I talk about magnetizing, I want you to just think about it like this. It's not a void that we like kind of draw others towards us by, right? It's not like you're a vacuum that you're like, right? Instead, I want you to think of it as like it's a fullness that you emanate, right? Like the flower that sends out that scent. And it thereby attracts the bee, your guy, naturally with no effort from you. Have you ever just felt good for whatever reason, like independent of your man, right? And like you just are having a good day. You're feeling light. You're feeling joyful for the day or for a number of days. And then it's like all of a sudden your husband, your partner starts paying you more attention and like laughing with you or like circling his arms around your waist more often or, right? Like just being more attentive and loving. That is not just a coincidence. It's because that light and joyfulness in you, that good, like I'm having a good day kind of thing, that's incredibly inviting energy. That's what I mean by magnetic, right? It's like it emanates out. It's this yummy smell that draws him in. Again, it's like a way of leading love, another way that I've put this. Right. So recently, as a little example of this in my own life, last episode, I talked about the trip that we took my husband and I took our anniversary trip to the ocean. And, it was just like 4 days maybe. And I spent a good amount of time, like I shared in last episode on that one, like filling my own self up, doing things I loved and getting into the place where I felt relaxed, and lit up. And, we spent time together and we were both in that light, relaxed, kind of joyful, filled up place. And by the end of our time together, like my husband couldn't keep his hands off me. It felt like we were back in the very beginning when we first met. And it was just like a powerful reminder of this. Like, it was like I was very magnetic to him then. And it was because I spent a lot of time nourishing me and doing things I loved and enjoying being with him, right? So the effort, instead of trying to get him to do all these things and meet your needs, the effort is way more about, the effective effort is really only about filling yourself up, being filled up, and creating happiness, satisfaction in yourself, right? Like in being the love that you are, in uncovering that, the joy that you are, removing whatever blocks it, right? And by extension from that place, then doing more of the things that you enjoy. So in order to kind of like emanate, as I've been saying, in this way, tend to your own happiness, your own fullness. Rest in a sense of fullness. Experience more fullness in yourself. Did I say that often enough? I know I can be repetitive sometimes. So this leads me to the question, how? How do you do this? Right? So one of the ways, really simple seeming thing, is we do this by engaging in more of the things that bring us that sense of fulfillment, fullness, vibrancy, right? By doing the things we ourselves are drawn to, right? Another way of putting this is, if you're not so happy in your marriage, if you want to be happier there, check how much you are doing for yourself, for your own joy and pleasure. So I'm going to give you some questions you can answer for yourself that will help you discover where you might not be doing a lot of this and where you could be doing more. So how much pleasure and fun are you allowing yourself in your day-to-day life? How much are you doing to create enjoyment in your own personal life? Aside from in your marriage, right? Away from your husband. How often are you doing things simply because you want to and it's fun for you? And if you aren't doing like a few of those a day, Where can you start adding more? And here's a fun one, like to kind of feel like, yeah, I realize I'm not doing a lot of that for myself. But you're like, I don't know where to start. What do I even do? What do we even like? So let me just ask you this. Which activities, when you engage in them, bring you a sense of fullness? Like maybe you haven't done them for a long time, but like maybe think back to the beginning of your relationship or before you got together with your husband, or even when you were a teenager. Like what activities did you just love that lit you up? Right? Like re-find that younger woman you were. That's another way to think about this. Can you go back and kind of do some of those same things? Or really just get discovering what you love and enjoy now. It might take some experimenting. Like some of you might remember I took a pottery class like a year and a half ago because I was like, I always wanted to do pottery. It seemed like so much fun. And it was fun. I don't think I experimented with it and I decided after a couple months that like, yeah, this is cool, but it doesn't really light me up, right? Other things light me up. For me, like lately I've been letting myself read my fiction book during the day sometimes. Gasp, right? Like that's been lighting me up right now, and it can change and ebb and flow. My very practical advice here is like, try to do 3 things a day that are just fun or just bring you pleasure or just feel like nourishment to you. And it was going to change every day, right? It doesn't have to be some exact thing that you always stick to. Just like let yourself be fluid with it and intuitive with it. Now, the other major way that we can do this, bringing ourselves this fulfillment and vibrancy and happiness, right? And this is actually even more fundamental and more essential than taking actions that bring us, joy, is living from a mindset of self-respect and self-valuing, of living from a place inside us of feeling deeply sufficient as we are. Because, for one, that leads more naturally to you doing the things, like taking the actions that bring you more fulfillment and joy, right? Like my valuing of myself is reflected in allowing myself to go lie down for a half an hour here and there in the middle of a day in the work week to read my fiction book for the joy of it. The doing of that sort of thing is really just an extension of the valuing and respecting of yourself. Like it's an extension of how you think about yourself. Developing and living from this mindset of self-respect and self-valuing, self-worth, it's also, in and of itself, a way of filling yourself, right? It fills you from within without necessarily even having to do all the things. Take lots of actions that bring joy, right? I have clients who don't spend a lot of time doing things or taking actions like reading their fiction book or going for long walks or making lots of time for their like pleasure and enjoyment. But they just make those like internal shifts in the way they think about themselves, the way they relate to themselves, and how valuable they feel, how deeply self-respecting they are. That lead them to naturally, like those shifts lead them to naturally feeling fun, fulfilled, vibrant, right? And they start then watching the magic, like that magic happen where their partner is suddenly being once again more magnetically drawn to them, right? Like writing them love notes and making them special meals, telling them how amazing they are. Yeah? So really the steps to feeding this well-being, this deep satisfaction, fulfillment, happiness inside of yourself that ripples out and then draws towards it more love and affection and like just a lighter relationship with your partner and a partner who's more attentive and attracted to you. The steps are really actually this. Number 1, know yourself as enough, as good, as worthy, right? Think well of yourself and know deep down in your bones that you are sufficient and wonderful. And the second step is take actions that reflect that. And most likely that will look like doing more of the things you enjoy just for the joy of it, just because it brings you pleasure and you deserve that pleasure because you're worthy of it, right? Now, the first step, right, that's really mindset work, is almost always the one, though, that gets in our way, right, of doing all these things, or of creating, of like allowing us to feel whole and complete and happy and fulfilled, right? More than like what our partner's not doing, or an actual lack of time in our life to do the things that bring us joy. Although your brain will tell you time is the reason, or your husband is the reason, or your other people's needs, your kids, your parents, or friends' needs is the reason you aren't feeling this way or aren't doing these things for yourself, or that money is the reason. Your brain loves to blame it on something out there, right? But really what gets in our way is our own mindset, like our inability to believe that we are good enough, that we are worthy of all of this, that we are worthy of taking time to play, right? All of that. So, and this is because, not your fault, there is a ton of messaging from the culture that we have as women unconsciously taken on that gets in the way of us giving ourselves the permission to do the things that are nourishing and joyful to us. And a lot of messaging from the culture that we've taken on as women that have gotten in the way of us having that sense within us of being worthy, of being worthy of having pleasure, of mattering enough to take time away from work, time away from caring for others, to bring ourselves joy and fulfillment, right? That's messaging that's been encoded into, and we think it's just the way that it is, that we shouldn't, we're not worthy enough of that. Like other things matter more, right? We're not important enough. And this is fundamentally robbing us of fulfillment, of vibrancy, of being able to do the things that bring that into our lives. And ultimately of then it's robbing us of being able to bring that, our best selves, the fullness of who we are, to the world, to our relationships, right? And it's robbing us of having the love and connection and romance and the thriving relationships that we actually deserve as women. So unraveling that internalized cultural messaging, like taking it apart and melting it away, and building the knowing of how deeply valuable, how worthy of this kind of self-respect, this kind of care, this kind of pleasure, that is some of the most important work of feeling full, of being a happy wife, of being a fulfilled woman who then has a wonderful marriage with her partner. So if you know that there's room for you to step further into this sense of fullness and vibrancy, or you don't think you have time for doing, a few of these things that bring you pleasure and joy a day, or if you aren't able to prioritize your pleasure and well-being, your primary work is more mindset work, more learning to value and respect yourself enough to care deeply for yourself. Right? That alone will begin to fill you way more up. And it will also lead to a natural inclination to do way more of the things that are fun and pleasurable to you, which will further fill you up, right? Which will fill and spill over, right? Like that flower spilling its smell all around it, until, others are drawn to you like a bee, right? Until your husband is more like, there's that woman I fell in love with, right? Oh, there she is again. I love her so much. I want to spend so much time with her. I want to kiss her. I want to hug her. I want to make her special meals. I want to tell her how much I cherish her. Yeah? That has been my experience and my clients' experiences. It sort of feels like magic, but it's just the way it works. So, without providing yourself this fullness, this completion, right? This sense of wholeness, without devoting yourself to your own happiness, you give yourself very little chance of having the light, loving, joyful relationship you really want with your husband. So start with the completing of yourself, the fulfilling of you, yourself, and the fulfillment in your marriage will follow. And if you're like, yeah, that sounds great, but like, let's talk about the specifics for me and my specific marriage and where my specific blocks are and where his stuff is and how they collide and how we can sort through those and how we can get to a great place, to an amazing place in our marriage. That is exactly what we'll do when we coach together. So don't hesitate to set up a consult call. I have time for you. I'd love to talk to you. I'm scheduling consults out into September, so apply today. I'll put the link in the show notes. And before I say goodbye, I want to state something that might be obvious. Of course, your husband also needs to be filled up, right? Not work to the bone, not totally not enjoying and feeling fulfilled in himself, right? For one, to receive that beautiful magnetizing scent of the flower that you are, right? And two, to just be able to be present with you at all, right? So encourage his playtime too, right? Encourage his fulfillment too, if you want to, if that feels good to you. At least let him know that he has permission to pursue that for himself in this marriage with you. Make sure to show up and listen to next week's episode where I bring on a special guest who's also a highly sensitive person, coach and expert. And we're going to be talking about some of this like cultural stuff that gets in the way of us as women and as highly sensitive people, providing ourselves with this fulfillment, like what blocks us from being able to live in a way that really supports our well-being and think about ourselves in a way that really supports our well-being. So we're going to talk about that next week. So definitely join us then. And until then, be oh so well.